Hello all, so I'm very excited about this video because I've been researching the subject on and off for around a year now. And so when I decided to make this video, I gave myself only 1 month to condense all of the research I've done, everything I've written so far, and condense it down into a little research document that I can upload to YouTube. And in a way, I'm also using this to disguise the pervading envy of mine because I wish I could participate in something like a philo café. I tried to condense the information as much as possible while also explaining it, but if there's anything you think I've missed, please comment down, or anything you would have liked to hear, please comment down, because this is something I'm continuously researching and I would like to make a more extensive video on this in a few years. So it would just be nice to come back to this and just be able to recreate it and maybe eventually write a paper on it. Prior to the philo café's existence as we know now, ancient Greek philosophers used the ancient agora as a meeting place to partake in philosophical discussion. Socrates, known as the father of Western philosophy and the Socratic method, emphasized the importance of dialectic in public spaces. For the viewers of mine who are unfamiliar with the Socratic method, it is the use of questioning as deep inquiry and analysis to refine understanding of the subject at hand. This can manifest in questioning the subject in effort to identify fallacious inconsistencies with a statement and/or argument. In the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, dialect is defined as an argumentative exchange involving contradiction or a technique or method connecting with such exchanges. Basically, it is the manner in which people oppose each other's arguments by challenging the former's beliefs. In the Republic, Socrates would engage in dialogue with a variety of Athenians in search of the nature of justice. Symposium was on the nature of love and beauty, and Phaedo, Socrates' last dialogue, discussed the soul. Socrates also preferred dialogue over writing. In Phaedrus, he says, quote, "For this invention, while referring to writing, will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory." Because of this belief, he did not write a singular philosophical text. It was his students who essentially documented these conversations. Eventually, Socrates was executed after being charged with corrupting the youth and impiety. However, even post-mortem, Socrates' confidence in dialectics influenced his students' philosophical work. I guess he really knew how to carry on the dialogue. Plato, Socrates' student, was thoroughly disillusioned with the political state of Greece. This was evident in the Republic, where he said, quote, "Until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and the political greatness and wisdom meet in one, and those commoner natures who pursue either the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside, cities will never have rest from their evils, no, nor the human race, as I believe, and then only will this our state have the possibility of life and behold the light of day." In short, Plato believed that a just society would only take shape once philosophers or political rulers who harbor profound philosophical wisdom are in control of the state. In Plato and the Socratic Dialogue, Charles H. Kahn discusses Gregory Vlastos' research in the book Socrates, Ironist, and Moral Philosopher. He argues that Plato's thesis and methods of argument are derived from Socrates' view. Quote, "On this view, the early dialogues depend not only on Plato's memory of Socrates' words, but also on his imaginative continuation of Socratic lines of thought. But this continuation is so faithful to the thought of the master that we can safely treat Plato's early dialogues as reliable documents for the philosophy of Socrates." During the year 387 before Christ, Plato naturally opened up his academy, and of course, its teaching method was rooted in Socrates' pedagogy. Pedagogy. I don't know how to pronounce it. The Academy focused on both oral and written teachings, highlighting the importance of learning to think critically. This is where the idea of idea/forms was born. The theory of forms is the assertion that the physical objects we experience are abstract forms, all of which are unchanging and underlying. Public philosophy is the root of all philosophy. Even within Western academia, as Plato formalized philosophy into an academic setting while maintaining Socratic forms of dialect. The concept of public philosophy was also profoundly perceptive amongst Maya, Azteca, and Inca civilizations. It broached fundamental issues of reality, morality, and the nature of the universe. They held such philosophies that were an inherent part of their religious belief, cultural practices, and social structures, with traces of understanding the universe at a high level. Since their philosophical practices had to respond to intellectual interests such as understanding of reality, human cosmic significance, moral virtues, and acquiring knowledge, there were several philosophies among the Incas and the Azteca and the Mayas. These political systems, combined with ethical principles, led the civilizations to embrace strong communal responsibility. According to María Luisa Rivara en Pensamiento Prehispánico y Filosofía e Ideología en Latinoamérica, refuted Eurocentric beliefs about philosophical deficits in pre-colonial societies. These different pre-colonial philosophical systems pursued parallel objectives to explain humanity's place in the world and the universe surrounding them. Albeit overlooked by Western scholars, these civilizations exhibited extensive knowledge on justice as well as governance. Mesoamerica's Maya civilization, from about 2000 BCE to the Spanish conquest of the 16th century, was highly developed in public philosophy of harmony and reciprocity. The Maya and spiritual ethical orders ruled by the principle of q, which means sacredness, indicating the harmony of human beings, nature, and the divine. Qianwenyuyu, which is the king, established a balance between the gods and humans, instituting cosmic order through ritual governance. Additionally, they believed in the Popol Vuh, the idea of collective decision-making. This was reflected in their political councils. Their philosophy was that of the common good over individual ambition, which engaged them in social responsibility. Maya also held that time was cyclical and life was interdependent. Thus, their Popol Vuh was the sacred text that depicts their creation of myths and their philosophical worldview of the world and humans. They also had the spirit of a resistance orientation, resisting the colonial forces throughout their history. It was a philosophical resistance and was expressed symbolically in sacred texts and mythological legends. Aztec philosophy was also largely formed by the being of the Tlamatinime, which means wise men. These then shaped the Neltilistle and additionally the Teochtlu, which means the divine quality that pervades reality. Its Calmaec and Tepochali schools, discernment, courage, and responsibility were stressed. Furthermore, recorded wisdom, Tlaquiloli, was used by the Aztecs to provide historical origins and moral counsel to ensure social harmony between rulers and their citizens. The firmness of political authority was derived whenever rulers were in accordance with the ethical principles and possessed by qualities of humility and justice. The religious belief of the Aztecs focused on understanding both what constitutes reality while demanding proper ethical conduct from their people. The Florentine Codex serves as an example as it presents documentation and reflections about human existence. The Aztecs developed special codes for interpersonal social relations that express their preference for organized and disciplined interaction within the community. During the early 15th to the 16th century, Inca civilization focused on social order together with collective welfare needs. Reciprocal exchange through Aini became a foundation for both economic and political organization, which supported mutual aid between communities. The Sapa Inca served as the divine high ruler who governed the Inca state while being accountable for maintaining harmony and prosperity. Through the Mita, which means mandatory public service, the Inca society demonstrated dedication to communal work and illustrating personal success through communal health. The Inca philosophy supported a structured method of governing which incorporated moral and social responsibilities as a means of upholding order. Additionally, according to Inca beliefs about the universe, aspects of life including sleep and wakefulness are essential in maintaining cosmic equilibrium. The philosophy demonstrates an awareness of natural phenomena that interconnects. Through their herbal and medical practice, Inca society combined empirical approaches and knowledge with philosophical models to treat both physical and mental health of their people. Over in the West, the roots of the philosophy cafe began to sprout with the emergence of coffeehouse culture in Europe, more specifically in the 17th through the 8th century during the Enlightenment. Prior to the Enlightenment, there was the scientific revolution, which took place from the 16th through the 17th century. Taverns were incredibly popular during this period preceding the surge of coffeehouse culture throughout Europe. These taverns would serve as a space in which individuals could gather, drink alcohol, and eat. At the time, people either drank water mixed with alcohol or pure alcohol in place of water. Keep in mind, coffee wasn't introduced as of yet, other than drinking a damn fine cup of coffee in the morning. Individuals during this period would either drink a concoction of water and alcohol or just straight alcohol. Michael Pollan in the Wired video titled How Coffee Addiction Changed History offers a really great explanation of this. So, apologies if I butcher his explanation, but alcohol was substantially more safe to consume compared to water. Water was ridden by disease, whereas the fermentation process within alcohol would kill the microbes that made water dangerous to drink. Later on, once coffee was popularized during the 17th century, this discovery fueled the Enlightenment. Coffee houses started to open left and right, and diverse selections of themed establishments began to arise. For instance, Café Procope is a very famous example of this. It is considered the very first literature-based coffee house, accommodating revolutionary thinkers and writers like Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau. Coffee houses are the direct predecessor of the philo-café that we know now. They served as a third space for dialect dialogue and debate for intellectuals alike. François-Marie Arouet, known as Voltaire, was a French philosopher and writer. I would say that he is one of the faces of the Enlightenment and an extreme coffeegoer. He chugged up to 40 cups of coffee a day, and he was so deeply intertwined with the coffeehouse and Parisian salon culture, so the importance of his work lies in the accessibility and fluidity of how his ideas circulated to the public. For instance, Candide, Voltaire's most recognizable novel, is a critique of institutional corruption through optimism. Being in the best of all possible worlds is heavily satiricized, while the protagonist, Candide, endures outright absurd happenings based off of historical events. Voltaire would go on to write about advocacy for justice, freedom of thought, and the power of public opinion. Diderot is also a French philosopher and writer who is mostly known as the chief editor for the Encyclopedia. Diderot believed in public discourse as a primary source of progressive ideas. He opposed censorship and advocated for intellectual freedom, universal education as empowerment, and challenged religion in favor of materialism. The Britannica defines materialism as, quote, the view that all facts, including facts about the human mind and will and the course of human history, are causally dependent on physical processes or even reducible to them. The Encyclopedia is considered the inscribed record of the Enlightenment philosophy in all of its entirety. It is a 28-volume encyclopedia publication ultimately aimed to democratize knowledge. Last night, I recorded this video from around 3 p.m. until 4 a.m., so I decided, you know what, I'm not going to finish this video tonight, and so I decided when I woke up in the morning, I would continue it. And it is not the morning, it is now the afternoon, but that's why you may see a change in lighting and a change in outfit, so I just want to explain that. Coffee consumption and colonialism within Latin America is also deeply intertwined with the Western Enlightenment. Coffee as a major commodity also encountered these ideological movements, fueling debates on how to govern economic power, and national identity. Emerging coffee colonialism and Enlightenment thought, Latin American economies were completely reshaped. Political structures were reconfigured as well. Moreover, coffee's rise as a significant economic player in Latin America also contributed to politics and power dynamics. In the 16th century, the Spanish and Portuguese conquest over the native people initiated a long period of domination. Reshaping of the economies and the societies and governance were transformed by these conquerors. The land provided extensive wealth. The forced labor systems, most notably encomienda and later repartimiento, imposed European social structures. However, coffee, first discovered by European traders in Ethiopia and then cultivated in the colonies, became a catalyst for economic development and production in Latin America. In the 18th and 19th century, production increased significantly in Brazil, Colombia, and Central America. It fostered both economic prosperity and social inequalities. It drove the entrenchment of European labor systems, including slavery and indentured servitude. The rise of coffee plantations coincided with the growing influence of the Enlightenment in the 18th century, thus paradoxically justifying and challenging colonial rule. Coffee experts brought economic prosperity in a Western sense, therefore creating a wealthy land-owning class that controlled much of the power over national politics. The ideas of rationality, justice, and use of reason to challenge authorities advocated by the Enlightenment thinkers spoke directly to Latin American figures, the colonial elites, and the intellectuals. Of critiques of colonial corruption, economic exploitation, posited by figures such as Alexander von Humboldt and José Antonio de Villarroel, through the lens of justice and equity principles emphasized by the Enlightenment philosophers. Prieto, in Corrupt and Rapacious, Colonial Spanish-American Past Through the Eyes of Early 19th Century Contemporaries, demonstrates how these intellectuals drew on European philosophical traditions to criticize Spanish rule for political reforms in consonance with Enlightenment thought. These principles directly supplied the ideological framework for the independence movements that swept across the continent in the late 18th and early 19th century, and whose effects established the foundations of nascent republics. In exemplifying how coffee's economic importance fostered intricate political games between oligarchic factions fighting for control over market stability and state policies is the Taubate Convention of 1906. Interventions within the coffee economy constituted more than economic strategies. They served as political tools for maintaining stability among the competing interests in the elite class in power. The economic dependence on coffee reinforced social hierarchies as well as exposed tensions between liberal economic policies and state control. Nevertheless, the political impact of the Enlightenment led both to the undermining and reinforcement of colonial structures, leaving colonialism as a defining feature in political evolution. Enlightenment principles provided the intellectual justification for independence and government's reforms, yet were also co-opted to maintain and even impose new types of domination. The idea of what coloniality of being is how Western Enlightenment values were used to legitimate continued subjugation and preservation of social and racial hierarchies even after formal independence. Gomez Quintero, quote, "The values and beliefs of Western modernity became the paradigms which shaped the implementation of modern project to peripheral societies. This demonstrates the complexities of the Enlightenment influence in post-colonial Latin America. The Enlightenment both subverted and strengthened colonial structures. However, the intellectual justification for independence and reforms in governance provided by the Enlightenment principles was also used to help maintain new forms of domination. The modern philosophy cafe movement is characterized by the 20th century existentialists. Paris is divided by the left and the right bank. The left bank is home to the very famous Sorbonne Academy, and most notably the alma mater of Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, who are both influential figures in the existentialist movement. Kevin Aho, in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, explains the existentialist by saying, quote, "Existentialists forward a novel conception of the self not as a substance or a thing with some pre-given nature or essence, but as a situated activity or way of being whereby we are always in the process of making or creating who we are as our lives unfold." Basically, he is saying that the existentialists believe that the self is not a fixed or predetermined essence, but a fluid and unending process of identity creation. Quote Sartre, "Existence precedes essence." Sartre was definitely making it up as he go. Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, also held significant influence on the existentialist movement prior to the Paris Philocafé scene. Heidegger's 1927 text, Being and Time, emphasized the search of authenticity combined with the concept of being towards death. Most people learn about the existentialist movement through Albert Camus. For me, he was one of the first philosophers that I read with the intention of learning philosophy. Take this as you will. This is my opinion, but because Camus was not an academic, I believe that he was able to properly articulate existentialist concepts to the general public in a way that other philosophers just could not wholly emulate. Camus was a journalist, and that is a profession that places emphasis on distributing information to the masses, meaning he knew how to articulate his work in a comprehensible manner for the general public, whether intentional or not. A good example of this is through his novels The Myth of Sisyphus and The Stranger, because they expanded on both the human condition and absurdism. Camus was a frequent participant in the Parisian café culture. Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre oftentimes took the form as the hosts at Café des Flores and Les Deux Magots. They would regularly hold meetings to discuss individual freedom, mauvaise foi, which means bad faith, and responsibility. Most notably, these are how the existentialist philosophy was adopted by Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. Bad faith is a form of deception that adopts identities, actions, and/or beliefs to absolve oneself of responsibility, and in turn, the individual denies themselves absolute freedom. Interestingly enough, this concept and Marxism intersect. Sam Combs, in the text Sartre's Concept of Bad Faith in relation to the Marxist notion of false consciousness, says, quote, "Ideology for Sartre acts almost exclusively as a mystification of individuals' capacity for free thought and obstructs the possibility of autonomous and meaningful action." Combs in this text later discusses more specific characters who are influenced by ideology and its relationship with bad faith. He believes that there is an intersection between the two concepts, but while ideology is collective, bad faith is personal. And because bad faith does not necessarily require collective concepts, it does not wholly align with the Marxist belief. However, as such, he still believes that there is an intersection between the two. Simone de Beauvoir also navigated existential thought through her book, The Second Sex, expanded into the collective oppression of the female sex being regarded as something as other, while males are considered to be the default sex. The notion of womanhood is not inherent identity, but a social construct that is heavily emphasized. Quote, "One is not born a woman, but rather becomes a woman." Transcendence in existentialism can be defined as the individual's freedom to evolve and create one's identity. Immanence, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's the act of being confined to passiveness. Beauvoir argues that women are often confined to the state and are encouraged to do so via household roles and dependency, therefore some lacking the autonomy to achieve true freedom. In After the Second Sex, Conversations with Simone de Beauvoir, she talks a bit more about the backlash she received from the second sex and resistance from the left wing. Camus found her work absurd, and others believed she was bitter, and then some people even accused Sartre of writing The Second Sex and not Beauvoir. Anyways, Paris's philosophy cafe culture served as almost a breeding ground for a great variety of philosophical thinkers to flourish, but not only that, many other skilled thinkers and artists also participated in this culture. The Mexican intellectual movement as a whole in the 20th century tried to articulate a unique philosophical identity in the context of history and culture, following the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920. Their efforts were turned to questions of national identity and the future of the country. José Vasconcelos and Samuel Ramos were Mexican thinkers, as they participated in the discourse of Mexicanidad that called for the selfhood personhood of the Mexican. They wanted to build new versions of Mexico's indigenous past within a contemporary and colonial context. Later, Octavio Paz would criticize these notions by connecting Mexican solitude with universal human experience. In The Labyrinth of Solitude, Paz said that Mexican identity, by virtue of a history of isolation and introspection, believed to be necessary to understand the general human condition, emerged out of this. Kaiser Ortiz, in Four Thinkers in the 20th Century Genealogy of Mexicanidad, argues that this reading offered an enhanced take on the discussion around identity that connected personal and collective experiences. Existentialism also arose in Mexico, as the works of José Gálvez introduced it with the translation of Heidegger in Spanish. In Mexico, the dialogue of existentialism reconciled the history with personal experience, offering a tension between the revolutionary history and the meaning of authenticity of the individual. Moral philosophy and literary themes by Leo Tolstoy resonated deeply with the Mexican intellectuals. His emphasis on nonviolence, moral integrity, and rejection of oppressive structures resonated with many Mexican thinkers, among intellectuals troubled over the political and society problems in Mexico. Tolstoy's ideas, such as that of individual moral responsibility to correct social injustice, found a receptive audience. It is also true that Marxism has greatly fostered Mexican philosophy, especially in the matter of political transformations. The roots of philosophical underpinnings of the Mexican left are traced back earlier. However, the character was more pronounced in post-revolutionary periods when Mexico was confronting freedom, class struggle, and economic inequality. Marxism was the framework that allowed people to analyze capitalist system and imagine alternatives that were more equitable. Figures such as Diego Rivera and the wider communist movements are legacies of Marxist thought in Mexican intellectual circles. In fact, Marxist analysis was a powerful tool in fighting for social justice, positioning itself as a central theme on the debate on inequality and political exchange in Mexico. Ortiz also explains that among the most outstanding figures in Mexican philosophy, Octavio Paz explored the debate on the themes of identity, freedom, and the meaning of Mexican history. In The Labyrinth of Solitude, Paz explored the existential and cultural conjugations of Mexicans in the modern world. He used his explorations of Mexican solitude as a metaphor of the human condition, the isolation and introspection that characterize the Mexican experience. In Mexico City, the 20th century witnessed an interplay of philosophical ideas. An ideological contribution to this period called for an intellectual landscape that would be based on existentialism and Marxism, as well as other literary influences like Tolstoy's, which would study Mexico's historical struggles and explore Mexican identity. These discussions were framed with the help of figures such as Octavio Paz, whose fusion of literary and philosophical inquiry continues to inform Mexican thought today. Currently in Mexico City, hosted by UNAM, the university there are more than 10 active philosophy cafes, with an average of 450 sessions a year. They discuss questions like, can betrayal be forgiven, and is gossip a form of knowledge? Usually one person moderates that section and continuously questions them and tries to challenge their ideas. It's called Filosofía en la Ciudad, and it's a really awesome project I highly suggest looking into. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Bye.